Men are created to have significance. It's one of the deepest drives in our heart. But how we define it, that'll mess up our life.
Yeah,
if we define it as being larger, bigger, better, more popularity, more fame, more recognition, more invitations to speak, more sales of the book. If you define your significance in that, you're hoodwinked by the enemy, and you're headed for a fall. Probably
he's playing it. The enemy is playing it. There's no doubt about it.
Seeing major church leaders walk away from the faith has almost become a common feature in the news. Many believers are left asking why, what happened. In today's episode, Doug Wellborn joins us to share his insights after years of counseling pastors and church leaders. Before we join them, though, we want to acknowledge that being a part of a church that dissolves or had a pastor step down can be very hard emotionally and spiritually. If you or someone you love is struggling with this, check out David Wilkerson's book, Have You Felt Like Giving Up Lately? It's available now as a free online audiobook at worldchallenge.org. We are able to make resources like this audiobook and podcast available thanks to the generous support of our listeners. Please consider donating to power the mission and make these works possible. Now, here's our host, Gary Wilkerson.
Hi, Gary Wilkerson here on the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. I'm real excited about today's podcast. I think we're going to see and hear some amazing things. It's especially designed for those of you who are in Christian leadership or aspire to Christian leadership or ministering to people. And we're going to be talking with Doug Wellborn today about developing the inner strength to carry out the kind of ministry that God's called you to, and soul care, and some really good issues. And Doug was a pastor for many, many years in New Jersey, and now works partly with the World Challenge, doing pastors' conferences all over the world and leading very life-changing ministry there, and also then personal counseling ministry with other pastors as well. So Doug, welcome. Glad you're here, and looking forward to talking to you about some deep issues, some things that are really deep on our heart. Yeah,
appreciate it.
Doug, I want to ask you about, more specifically now, about Christian leadership, pastors, leaders of ministries, missions organizations. You have a personal counseling ministry for Christian leaders. You travel around the world speaking to hundreds and hundreds of pastors and leaders. What are you seeing overall taking place in the church? What would you say is the spiritual condition of Christian leadership today, as you see it, and as you're experiencing people in the field?
I would say there's a difference between the U.S. and overseas. I would see in the U.S. there is still, though it's waning because the younger generation is not interested in the show. What I mean by that is, the big band and props and everything. I didn't read. My nephew is a very high-end sign maker. He can do anything, and he worked for a church. They're a client, and they spend $250,000 a year on signs. And I heard that. I just, I told him. I said that. I didn't blame him. They're a client. But it just kind of made me sick. But I just don't believe in that at all. So still, a lot of pastors that are into that mode of building shows, building edifices, buildings that are very impressive, and trying to get people in to their buildings, into their children's ministries, which are like Disneyland. I'm very concerned about that. I guess in a nutshell, Jesus doesn't need that to be cool.
Mm-hmm. Is that symbolic of something going on inside the heart of the leadership? Do you think there's a correlation between?
I believe there is.
And what would you say would be the inner workings of somebody who's, and I've heard you talk about this before. You're not saying like, to have a good band is wrong, or to have a nice building is wrong. But if all your energy is wrapped up around how good is our performance and how good is my talk, and you're not, Christ is not centering it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a line somewhere, and I'm not the one to make it. I am not one of these guys, even though I'm doing it now in this podcast a little bit. I don't go around knocking churches.
But you are somebody who's seeing kind of underneath, you're looking underneath the hood, and you're seeing the condition of a pastor's heart who is striving, burned out.
Those kind of pastors burn out bad, okay, on a regular basis. A lot of them keep going once they're burned out, but their ministry, that's when you see mega church crisis, and because they're more famous, they become, more in the media and so on, because they've been burned out for 10 years, so they have an affair, or the people begin to leave because they don't have the chops anymore, because they're very, very, very talented people. Some pastors are extraordinarily talented people. Really, sometimes I'm surprised at the utter ability that some to not only preach but lead, and way more talented than I ever was as a pastor, and but they're relying on themselves, and in most cases they're doing it for themselves. They're building a kingdom, and that is just contrary to the kingdom of God. So though God is gracious and he will use those churches in any way he feels he wants, I don't believe the basis of the church is from the kingdom of God. That's a strong statement. I can't say that about every church, but I'm saying that as a pattern, and I think there's still a lot of that going on, though.
What would you say would be if they can look under the hood, 2 or 3 of the primary things that you're seeing that the pastors are not dealing with in the sense of like trying to grow a church or meeting their budget, but internally, what are some of the major struggles pastors are dealing with? So when someone calls you, say, "Hey, Doug, really, my issue is I feel really..."
The biggest issue I see is pastors that are not that talented trying to do what those other pastors are doing. That's the biggest issue I see. And they try and try and try, and it never works. So
why are they
down the road there's a church of 5 to 10,000, whatever, and they never get past 150, and they're trying the same things.
Why are they trying to do that? What do they want?
They're trying because that's what's expected. That's what it means to be a pastor and be successful. And they're believing the ultimate lie of the evil one, that life is found in this world, which is completely a lie. There is no life in this world. So pastors use this world to find life from God, which is an abomination. My people have committed 2 sins, it says in Jeremiah. They have drinking from cisterns which hold no water, and forsaken me, the living water. So they're copying, they're striving to find their life in this world. There's people around them that are very good, and they're full of shame because they think life is here. and the shame is overwhelming. And they're broken. They're nobody. I'm no good. I'm a loser. I can't preach. I can't. And sometimes they're right, But sometimes they're good pastors. If they would live out their calling, they'd be an okay pastor.
Yeah.
But they're never going to have 10,000 people.
Yeah.
But they're not following the Lord, and they're living out of this world, and they're copying others, and they're for a man, significance is the highest need. For a woman, it is security and safety. So if you don't have significance as a man, you feel like you're dying. If you have it, you feel like you're alive. Just think in your own life, if you had a promotion or something and they say, man, I feel so good, or you get fired. It's like, I'm a piece of crap,
Yeah.
And if we secure it, that's so important to men. And so...
Comes down to I think it comes down to wrong. I believe it comes down to wrong definitions. That you're absolutely right that men are created to have significance. Is one of the deepest drives in our heart. But how we define it, that'll mess up our life.
Yeah,
If we define it as being larger, bigger, better, more popularity, more fame, more recognition, more invitations to speak, more sales of the book. If you define your significance in that, you're hoodwinked by the enemy, and you're headed for a fall. Probably
he's playing you.
Yeah.
The enemy is playing you. There's no doubt about it.
But the other end of significance is much richer. It's more nuanced. It's more difficult to look at it and say that gives me that fills that need for significance in me, and that is, it's being gracious to people. It's being helpful. It's being generous. It's being long suffering. It's being. And I would sum it up like the Gospels do with the law. It's fulfilled by love, and I think if I were to meet two pastors in a city and we were sitting around having lunch, and one of them said, like a pastor did to me, we were in Brazil, and this pastor walked up with his entourage and had these hipster glasses on. And he put out his hand. He goes, "I'm the pastor of the second largest church in our region." And I said, "Do you have a name?" It's like, he's introducing himself by his identity is wrapped up in his building and the number of people that he has in his church. And so, I kind of know right from the beginning. So I could be sitting down at a table with him and another pastor who could tell me the story of a teenager in his church who started using drugs, and he walked alongside of him and prayed for him and counseled him, and 6 months later that kid's set free, thriving, and now going to college. That kind of he loved that kid.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's significance. But we don't. Unfortunately, we live. Some of this is not our fault in a sense. And I don't mean to excuse our own sin, but we are culturally inundated with this messages of smell good, look good, have a lot of Twitter followers, become famous, become rich, become wealthy, and that seeps into ministry too. And so our culture around us, and that's why I think it's different. It's different. When I first asked the question about the state of pastors today, you said it's America is one thing, and the rest of the world is different, because I think there's a less. I see a lot, like when I'm in Poland or Ukraine, South America to some degree, Central America more, I don't see as much cultural pressure to become visibly successful by measurements that are not biblical.
That's not their issue.
No, right.
I'm trying to think if I agree with you on it's not all our fault.
Well, here's what I mean by that. So I grew up in New York, and when I was in New York, I kind of acted a bit like a New Yorker. There's a New York persona, right?
Yeah, so did I when I pastored.
Then when I moved to Texas, I was in a totally different culture. I kind of calmed down a little bit. I wasn't so hyper. I went for walks. The culture affected me, and that's what I'm saying. I think culture affects us. We're conditioned. We're conditioned to some degree by our culture.
Culture is controlled by the prince of the power of the air, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm saying like, since I've gotten involved with this new ministry, I am more involved with deliverances and satanic issues than I ever have been before. What I'm saying is, Satan is, we're not fighting back, but Satan is fighting us constantly. And unless we get involved with that realm, it's going to be very hard for us to win this battle, that battle that you're talking about, because it is so strong. The lie is so strong that's coming at us all of the time regarding what gives life, what's important. Because I agree with you, and I am sucked into it just like everybody else is. Now, I'm older now, so it's not, it's easier for me now, but I will tell you, when I was in my late 20s and 30s, I was a sick puppy, man. I was like after, I was hot. My churches were doing well. My denomination, they wrote me up. I was in their magazines, and I was all about that. And I was sick, and I was way out, missing the boat. I missed the boat. And it took, a hit up a 2x4. And I thank God for it.
Yeah, it's one of the kindest.
It was my other big pain. And I thank God to this day that He gave me that, because I was what I can't say on a podcast. So we're under attack, and there's no life here, and we have to learn that. And the only way I know to do that is to wait on God. And I do believe in deliverance. I do believe Christians have allowed Satan to have footholds. I'm not talking, they're full of demons, but they've allowed footholds in their lives and strongholds in their lives, so that they, there's doors open for them to just be really captured by the world.
Yeah, you can't ignore the supernatural. It's a lot of
I found that it's bigger
and,
than I used to think it is. I don't think I don't think there's a demon behind every bush, but I believe it's a lot bigger than I used to think.
Yeah. I think there's there are, you can fall off the wagon on both ends of over emphasizing the demonic or ignoring that it's not there. As C.S. Lewis talked about that, in the Screwtape Letters. That's one of the great strategies, is to get them convinced we're not here, the demonic forces, and so. But that seems to bear because that's Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. So you see that in, as in this podcast we've talked about pastors, but before we talked about one episode we talked about pastors who are committing suicide, which is happening more and more. Pastors who are quitting the ministry.
I am seeing pastors quit more. 1,500 pastors quit a month.
Right.
50% of all seminarians quit before 5 years. And there is more suicides that are taking place. So.
Yeah, and then you've got the radio station called me a couple days ago and asked me about the Joshua Harris, a well-known Christian author and pastor who's, first of all, said he was getting divorced, and then he went on to say, sort of,
I'm not a Christian
anymore. And so you got pastors not only leaving the ministry now, they're leaving. It's not necessarily new, but it seems to be, and that's got to be something
that was
from.
Just a shock to me.
It's got to be from the enemy. That it's not just somebody who's. Just on his own, just kind of rationally thinking through things, or a pastor rationally thinking through whether I should keep my life or take it. These are demonic forces that work, right?
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. And so your message to these pastors then, as you're traveling around, you preached. You were in El Salvador recently, and you did 11. You told me 11 sessions.
Yeah, I preached a lot.
And what are you trying to communicate?
Since you've invited me to what I find is most of the pastors, it's different in different places, obviously, based on what they've been taught. But number one, they're very devout. Some places are very poor, so they work a full-time job. And generally, they're very sweet-spirited people. So I can't say enough about how much I love these people. God has given me a tremendous love for these pastors. I really believe it's supernatural, but I really love these pastors. And what I find is what they are taught, for the most part, is we've talked about it before, they've been taught moralism, behavioralism. In some cases, it really is a legalism because it's, out of the Bible and, you're bad, we'll kick you out of the church and that kind of a thing. But it's at least moralism, do this, don't do that. It's the law, basically it's the law, you're good if you do this, you're bad if you don't do that. And it's that all the time, And in many places, they're very forceful in the way they present it. That's their style. And they have absolutely never heard what I am talking about. So when I start talking and start to get into it, it's very often that many of them begin to quietly weep. And then as I go along more and more, I don't always give altar calls. I try to listen to the Holy Spirit on that. But when I do, there's usually a good amount of people that come forward, and I have some great opportunities. And their words are always the same. They say, you need to go, you need to come back, you need to go here, you need to go there. We've never heard this. You have to teach this to other people. This is the truth. We've never heard the truth. I mean, they've never heard the inner message of Christ before. And they're like, this last time, it was like some of them were like panicky, like they had people who worked in different places. And they were like, you have to go there. I have friends there working, and you must go right away. And I'm not putting myself up. It's not me. It's because the Holy Spirit is teaching them about Jesus, and not about good and it's not about good and bad. It's about life and death. Are you living in life or death? And that's why it is so incredibly satisfying. I can't think of anything more satisfying.
What is the main thing, if you could press it down into one thing that they haven't heard that they're hearing now that's helping them come alive? Is there one particular, like if you could give your elevator talk on, if you were in an elevator and somebody said, well, what message is it that you're preaching, just from either from your notes there on your iPad or from your heart, if you prefer?
I'm just going to give you the only reason I'm opening my iPad is just to remind myself of things. I give the first message, it's long, so I usually do it in 2 pieces, and I just call it the foundation. And I teach them that everything is on the inside, which I believe. I believe that the whole Christian life is on the inside, and it's not on the outside. I mean, there are certain things. There's nothing wrong with trying to do the right thing, okay? But if the truth of the gospel is on the inside, it's not trying to be good. So that's probably the most important thing. I think I really hit that hard.
It's good. Yeah,
Secondly, I talk about their identity, and that's also 2 messages. because there's so much shame. These men are so full of shame. They've been told since they were young. I don't know where it all comes. I talk to some of them and counsel some of them, but they're so full of self-loathing, and it just breaks my heart. I mean, they're really heroes in my mind, but they don't think much of themselves at all. And so I work, work very hard to help them to see how much they're loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if your identity is skewed from who you really are, it just throws everything. It's the thing that drives people to build a kingdom for themselves. Like
exactly.
They feel like, because I have self-loathing, but if I could just do enough for the kingdom, then I won't hate myself and I won't be hated. And I was looking the other day at when Jesus said to his disciples, his friends, and he says that this is astonishing. He says, "You are the light of the world." And so basically, what he's saying to these guys is, "You're brilliant. Everywhere you go, you illuminate things. Just like you light up a room when you walk into it." But if you read that through your own lens of self-hatred, for instance, or through the law will hear Jesus is speaking into your identity, trying to speak life into you, and you hear him say, "You're the light of the world," and you go like, "Okay, I'll try really hard to be the light of the world."
Right.
Give me 10 laws, 10 rules to become this light you're talking about. And he's not saying, no, become the light of the world or try to be the light of the world or here's how you become the light.
Yes.
He's saying you are the light of the world. And others would say, if they're self-loathing, self-hatred, like, no, I'm not the light of the world, Jesus. I know you're trying to be nice to me, but, that. And then the self-help movement would claim that 10 times over. I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Trying to convince yourself you are something he already told you. Again, it's not an aspiration. It's not, and that's, to me, that speaks to what you're talking about. The identity is, you are loved. You are accepted. You are the light. Yeah. You are forgiven. You are whole. You are.
And it takes revelation. I talk about the Ephesians where it says that we must be strengthened in our inner man by the power of the Spirit, so that we might know the height and depth and so on of the love of God. Most people don't realize that we just take love lightly. It's like for Christmas and baby showers, but this is a big deal. It takes work. God is doing work. Our inner man must be expanded and emboldened. Mm-hmm. So we can't take. So I talk a lot about what it means to embolden and enlarge our spirits, because we have raisin spirits. Mm-hmm. Because we're experts on the world, our souls, biblically speaking, our minds and our volition and all that. We know we're experts at the world because we're in it all the time, but we don't even fool with her. So we have to build our spirits, and I talk about how to do that. And so that we will begin to be strong enough to spiritually to take in the love of God. And when that begins to happen, you begin to feel loved by the God. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter. It's like, that guy over there hates you. It's just like,
doesn't matter. I'm
sorry about that, but that doesn't knock me off my feet. It used to knock me off my feet, but I'm full.
I love that.
So, and then that gives you identity. So
wow, that's powerful stuff. And you have a book too. You wrote a book. Was it last year or?
I wrote a book last year. It was published last year.
What's it called?
It's called Spirituality Unscripted. Don't believe everything you hear. In the book? Don't believe everything you hear in the book? Or what? Don't believe everything you hear in the book? Is that what you're... No. Here's my book. Don't believe everything. I probably shouldn't. No, I like that. It's good. Yeah. It just talks about these themes in a kind of a free flow style, but it talks about these.
Okay. And how can people get it? Do you have like a?
It's not on Amazon right now.
Okay.
If they write, can I give an address?
We'll put it in. We call it show notes. So at the end of as people are looking at the podcast, they can see the.
Okay, if they write 216
okay.
Hawthorne Lane, Barnegat, New Jersey, and request the book, it's $9. But if they can't afford it, I'll give that.
Okay.
Give it to them.
I love that. And then, do you have any slots left? If or any pastors are listening to this and they feel like they could use a little bit of help, is there any? Can we put your email in the show notes as well, so people could look at your email and contact you? Do you have any openings for any pastoral counseling that you might be doing?
I have some.
Okay.
I do phone counseling. I live right now. I will be living out here in Colorado at some point soon. But right now I live on the Jersey Shore. My email is douglas.wellborn@gmail.com. So if you're from around the country and you would like to just talk a little bit, or you want to talk about more serious things, I'm very happy. I don't charge. I'm a missionary in that regard. I'm funded, so it won't even cost you. If you're in the Jersey area, you can call me and we can get together. So
excellent.
I'd be happy to chat with you.
I appreciate you offering that, Doug. Thanks for taking the time. You flew in from Jersey to be with us here today. You spoke to our staff this morning and shared on this podcast. So thanks for taking the time. Appreciate being with you and the work you're doing around the world and helping people. Keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, Gary, for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug.
God offers us freedom from the pressures and hollow promises of culture, but finding our way out of that mindset can feel challenging. Community and good friends will remind us that God's word satisfies and will never fail. Our Father calls us to be free from earthly standards, to be foolish in the eyes of the world, and find heavenly wisdom. The Gary Wilkerson Podcast is brought to you by World Challenge. Sound design for this episode by Mike Hallsmith. This episode was written by Rachel Schmitz. Our producer is Chris Wickington, with video production by Aaron Gale. World Challenge is incredibly thankful for the support we receive from many people across the country who believe in our mission. We are able to continue creating resources like this podcast because of donations from listeners like you. We hope you tune in next week to the Gary Wilkerson Podcast for more encouragement in your Christian walk. Until then, do all you can to live a better life and make a better world through Jesus Christ.